Hello, and welcome to Revelations and Grace. I'm John Paul, and today we're continuing our series on the end times. And today we're going to be discussing the symbolic nature of the book of Revelation. If you've been following me throughout this end time series, we've been mainly focusing on Jesus' promise that all these events would occur in the first century within his generation. And we've been making arguments for that, and we have touched on a couple literal fulfillments and who saw Jesus' return and the first century resurrection. We discussed a few historical events that could be seen as fulfillments of Jesus' promise to return in his generation and bring about the resurrection. But in these next few videos, we're going to be going more into that type of stuff, discussing the nature of the prophecies that are contained in about the end times, and especially inside of the book of Revelation. And this is going to be kind of a change of tone moving forward, because we're going to be diving into history and correlating history with prophecy. And there's going to be some speculation, but we're going to hopefully be making some really compelling connections and showing how the end times prophecies were actually fulfilled in the first century. And it's so exciting. We're going to be identifying the prostitute, the sea beast, the 10 horns of the sea beast, the land beast, the mark of the beast, some of the other language that's in Revelation that's really dramatic. We're going to be discussing Gog and Magog. And finally, we'll finish the series talking about how to interpret no more death and what implications this has for believers today. If you're excited to learn more before I release these videos, you're welcome to read any of these blog articles to see where I'm going with this. But I'm going to be working my way through these articles and making videos. So I hope you enjoy this next flavor of this next segment of videos, because you're hopefully going to learn about some history, and it's hopefully going to be a lot of fun. Well, Revelation is written in a literary technique called Apocalyptic Language. I don't know if you could call it poetry, but it was like a type of poetry that described ancient empire conflicts in dramatic, world-ending cosmic language. And this is indicated in the very first verse of Revelation. It says, "The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his bondservants what things it behooves to take place in quickness. And he signified it through having sent his angel to his servant John." So John was describing things that were about to take place in quickness, and he communicated it in signs, and he signified it. And this tells us that we're meant to interpret Revelation as a series of signs, and not as not literally reading it word for word. And in fact, Old Testament prophets did this same technique when they described prophecies of ancient empires' destruction. For instance, we see several verses in Isaiah, Ezekiel, Amos, and Joel that describe the destruction of ancient empires in the same apocalyptic tradition. For instance, Isaiah 34, verses 3 through 5, it describes the destruction of Edom. That's the descendants of Esau. And that came to pass in the 6th century BC. And here is how he describes it. "Their slain will be left unburied, and the stench of their corpses will rise. The mountains will flow with their blood. All the stars of heaven will be dissolved. The skies will be rolled up like a scroll, and all their stars will fall like withered leaves from the vine, like foliage from the fig tree. When my sword has drunk its fill in the heavens, then it will come up down upon Edom, upon the people I have devoted to destruction." So you might think that this is describing the end of the world, because he's talking about the stars falling like withered leaves, the skies being rolled up like the scroll, the mountains flowing with blood. But in fact, this is describing a destruction that took place in the 6th century upon Edom, and you see evidence of that in Malachi. In chapter 1, it talks about how God had destroyed Edom's descendants, his kingdom, that is. And that's a powerful evidence that this, in fact, did take place when God said it would. And this shows us the metaphorical nature of this type of language. And it's not the only evidence, just because it's happened already. This same language, here I am in Isaiah 34 in the World English Bible. It talks about all the army of the sky will be dissolved. That, of course, is referring to the stars, as you'll see in other translations. And it's describing the same language. But further down, it talks about how The streams of this land will be turned into pitch, its dust into sulfur, and the land will become a burning pitch. It won't be quenched day or night. Smoke will rise up forever. From generation to generation, it will lie waste. No one will pass through it forever and ever. So you're imagining this apocalyptic wasteland that has no ability to support life. The stars are gone. The skies are rolled up like a scroll. If you're interpreting this literally, there's no way anything could survive here. But in the next verse, God says, but the pelican and the porcupine will possess it. The owl and the raven will dwell in it. How are they finding food in a land that becomes burning pitch, that its dust becomes sulfur, that its streams are turned into pitch? How are they finding water? This is a clear indication that this is meant to be metaphorical language. God says it will be the habitation of jackals. The wild animals of the desert will meet with the wolves, and the wild goat will cry to his fellow. Yes, the night creature shall settle there, and shall find herself a place of rest. And this is so cool because the animals are finding rest in this land that's supposed to be burning pitch, with no more stars. And that just emphasizes the metaphorical nature. And if you take a second to step back and think about it, this might actually make sense. Imagine you're the king of Edom, watching your empire being destroyed around you. There's going to be blood on the streets. Yeah, the buildings are going to be on fire. That might actually make the moon be a hint of red. It might actually look red with the reflection of what you're seeing in your atmosphere. All the smoke and fire and blood. The sun's going to be covered up with the smoke from all the burning. You're going to have the stars disappear. The smoke's hiding them. And this language actually might be even more symbolic than that, because in those days, the kings used to see their gods, their lowercase gods that they used to worship and rely on for protection as the stars. The stars were symbolic of them. So it might be that when these Old Testament prophets were talking about the stars not giving their light or falling from the sky, it could be symbolizing how their gods that they trusted in wouldn't be able to save them from this destruction, how they were going to fall, the Elohim who were in charge of these different nations. So that might be what that pointed to. But I'm not sure if that's the case, but that's just a thought in there. But you can see how this could very well symbolize the destruction of a nation. I mean, to you, if your whole empire is wiped out, everything you've ever known is gone, it's going to feel like your world ended. And that very well might be what this was intending to convey. So Isaiah isn't the only prophet to do this. Ezekiel 32 says the same thing concerning Pharaoh, king of Egypt, when they would be destroyed by Babylon in 568 BC. In chapter 32, it writes, Yahweh's word came to me saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation over Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and tell him, when I extinguish you, I will cover the heavens and make its stars dark. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon won't give its light. I will make all the bright lights of the sky dark over you, and set darkness on your land, says the Lord Yahweh. So this was describing the destruction of Egypt by Babylon, and this actually occurred in the 6th century, but it does it in this cosmic language. And if we turn back to Isaiah 13, we'll see another example of this. He's describing the burden of Babylon, so a destruction that's going to come upon Babylon. And he's describing a destruction that actually occurred in history in 539 BC by the king of the Medes, Cyrus the Great. And if we read in verse 10, it says, For the stars of the sky and its constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going out, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken out of its place, and Yahweh of armies' wrath, and in the day of his fierce anger. Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them. So this is talking about when the Medes come to attack Babylon. Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, will be like when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It will never again be inhabited, neither will it be lived in from generation to generation. So he's describing the overthrow of Babylon by the Medes, and he's doing it in this cosmic language. The stars not giving their light, the sun being darkened, the moon will not shine. And this this is the apocalyptic style that a lot of these Old Testament prophets wrote in. John was familiar with these writings, and God had him write in the same apocalyptic style to describe the destruction of Jerusalem, which was about to take place soon after the book of Revelation was written. In Revelation 6, he says, "The stars of the sky fell to the earth, like a fig tree dropping its unripe figs when it is shaken by a great wind. The sky was removed like a scroll when it is rolled up. Every mountain and island was moved out of its place." And so in the tradition of these Old Testament prophets, he's describing the destruction of a nation that's about to occur in his time. And this might have very well been ordained by God to get the message of the destruction of Jerusalem out safely, because if a Christian is carrying letters describing the destruction of Jerusalem, they would have been intensely persecuted for it. It might have been that God cloaked that message in this apocalyptic language, so the average unbeliever wouldn't be able to discern what it was describing. And this would allow Christians to pass the letter around safely. I don't know if that's the case, but it seems to make sense that God would do that. And this is confirmed when the angel himself tells John to interpret the book in a symbolic fashion. If you recall, the first verse of Revelation says it's being communicated in signs. But later in chapter 17, we have the angel interpreting the vision to John and telling him how to interpret it. And he's describing it as a symbol. For instance, in Revelation 13, John sees a vision of a sea beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. And he's seeing a literal monster coming out of the sea. But the angel in chapter 17 says, what you're seeing is not a literal monster. It represents 7 mountains and 7 kings. He says that in verses 9 through 10. Here is the mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads, referring to the sea beast, are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. They are 7 kings. And then he adds this, 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. When he comes, he must continue for a little while. So notice at the time Revelation was written, 5 of these kings have already died. The 6th one is living at the time Revelation is written, and the 7th is about to come onto the stage. So this is obviously describing events that are taking place as John is writing this letter. And the angel tells him to interpret this beast as a symbol for an evil empire with 7 kings. And so that tells us, we need to be doing the same when we're interpreting the book of Revelation. We might be seeing a beast with 2 horns, but we need to know that probably represents an empire or an evil ruler or something like that. And we know that Revelation was a book written concerning events that were about to take place. So in order to interpret it according to its symbolic nature, we need to put ourselves in the shoes of John's audience and interpret the symbols from their perspective. And fortunately, the events and characters of the first century were so spectacular, it's hard to deny that they were the fulfillment of Revelation's prophecies. And there's many different interpretations on the exact fulfillment of these symbols in this period of history. For instance, you have Kurt M. Simmons and David Shelton make a strong case that the land beast was a first century Jewish entity. And Adam Marshak argues that the land and sea beast were Jewish entities. But my favorite interpretation comes from Daniel Moraes. And he has a website called revelationrevolution.org. And he presents compelling evidence, and he brings a lot of evidence to the table for his theories. So I'm borrowing a lot of his work here, adding some of my own flavor, some of my own information to it. But this is largely based on his work. And I encourage you to be open-minded about this and continue to research and study these things. I might get some of these wrong. I'm still learning as I go. But these are what I felt like are the most compelling fulfillments and arguments for who these characters symbolized. And I hope you stay tuned in these next few videos to discuss that. And this is also evident that we're supposed to interpret the book this way because sometimes Revelation even tells us who these characters are. For instance, the great dragon in Revelation 12 is called the devil and Satan. So we know the great dragon is Satan. And we'll learn later on that the great city represents is where the Lord was crucified. That's talking about Jerusalem. And we also know that the prostitute is known as the great city. So we know that the prostitute is Jerusalem, and we'll be covering those in a future video. So here's an outline of how I identify the characters, and we're going to be exploring these in depth as we continue in this series. The prostitute, of course, is the great city where the Lord was crucified, or Jerusalem. The sea beast was an archetype of the general conquerors of God's people, whom the saints should avoid. In the first century, Rome and its Caesars were the seven heads. And later in chapter 17, it discusses an eighth head of the beast, or an eighth king associated with this sea beast. And I identify that as Titus, who later became the eighth Caesar. The two witnesses are described in Revelation 11, and I believe they could have represented the spirits or manner of two prominent prophets sharing the body of Jesus ben Ananus. Jesus ben Ananus was a first century prophet who was calling out during the Roman-Jewish War destruction, and he's a really unique figure, and it seems to fulfill a number of these passages related to the two witnesses. But I'm still learning, and I'm not fully settled on this, so if I get this wrong, please forgive me, and please continue to pray and do your own research here. We also have Apollyon in Revelation 9 and 11 and 17. He's the leader of the locust armies, and I believe he was represented by the eighth Caesar, Titus. The 10 horns of the sea beast were the 10 Jewish generals, and we'll be discussing that in a video. And the 2 horns of the land beast were Vespasian and Titus, who both resurrected out of the severed head of the sea beast, which the severed head was Nero. And we'll be discussing that in a video too. Vespasian was also the false prophet, and we'll be discussing that. And he was the false Messiah, the lamb that spoke like a dragon. So I hope you enjoyed this series, and you're going to enjoy these next few videos. And I would like to thank Daniel Moraes for doing all this incredible research. Of course, you can find his website here, and I'd highly encourage you to check it out. And of course, pray about the material I'm researching and do your own studies. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy.